Thank you for listening to Tara Lynn's A Geek Saga podcast. This episode features audio from a discussion panel that was recorded at DragonCon 2021.
So this is the A Song of Ice and Fire 25th anniversary panel because 25 years ago, the first book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, A Game of Thrones, was published. I think the publisher is Batnum Books, or is it I can't remember. It's not important.
I can't remember the original one.
I don't think they know they're publishing them anymore either. So, if you go so long without a book, they kind of forget about you, I bet. But we're going to make some jokes about that later. All right. So we're going to talk about 25 years of the A Song of Ice and Fire series, and we're going to be talking mostly about the books, but I definitely think the show will come into it, just because it's really hard to separate the two at this point. We're going to talk a little bit about both. And so my first question for my panelists. Oh, wait a sec. I should introduce everybody first.
Technicalities.
Okay. It's DragonCon. All right. So I'm Jennifer. I am the director of the High Fantasy track here. And all this stuff that goes on in this room is stuff that me and my team of volunteers have put together. So I appreciate any and all feedback you guys give us via the app. And then to my left, we have...
Hey, my name is Tara. You can find me across the web at A Geek Saga. I am the founder and organizer of the first ever Song of Ice and Fire Game of Thrones convention in the U.S., which is Ice and Fire Con. And I also do a couple webcast podcasts. One is called the Geek Saga podcast, and the other one is Sagas and Sass, which is a genre, lit podcast for better,
Words are hard.
Yeah, it's hard. It's early.
Hi, I'm Nami. This is my husky voice. I go by Nami Sparrow on most internet things. Instagram and now YouTube are the things I do the most, but I suppose you could follow me on Twitter if you just want really, really cursed content. I am only barely older than the book series, but I do enjoy them. I am also on the Sagas and Sass webcast, and I also do lots of cosplays of Dorne. Only Dorne cosplays, because I like being able to breathe at conventions.
Okay. So the first question I want to ask you guys is, how did you first encounter the A Song of Ice and Fire series? So my personal history with it is, I come out of the Wheel of Time fandom. That was my first fandom, first internet fandom. And as I was getting into message board culture back in the late 90s, you talk a lot about the Wheel of Time books, but the Wheel of Time books at the time were coming out once every 2 or 3 years. And so you had to read something else in between. And so everybody was talking about this new series that had just been published. The first book had just come out, and it was pretty awesome. And it had a cover blurb on it from Robert Jordan. And the cover blurb for the first A Song of Ice and Fire book, Game of Thrones, right there on the front, it says, "Just the kind of fantasy that I like, Robert Jordan." And so, of course, all of the Robert Jordan fans are all right, this looks good. And so we started reading it. And there's always been a sort of a friendly rivalry between the Game of Thrones and Wheel of Time fans. But there's also a lot of us who really enjoy both. And so that's how I first encountered it. It was the thing that I read in between Wheel of Time books.
That's so funny, because I had zero idea that there was any sort of rivalry between these two fandoms.
I think it mostly exists in the heads of Wheel of Time fans.
Those are my favorite rivalries, because I did undergrad at NYU, and we have an imagined rivalry with Columbia. There are arch nemesis, but
do they know?
I don't know that they do.
Or care. Yeah.
No, definitely, probably they don't.
So I had friends suggest the series to me for years and years. I think the first time somebody suggested it to me was 2006. And then I heard that the show was coming out. Another friend was well, they're making a show of it now. And I just had this okay, well, if they're making a show, I'm going to read the books first. So I don't know, 2010 is when I started reading the books.
Yeah, I think that's when the show came out.
The show came out in 2011.
Yeah.
But it was I was reading them preemptively. So the only book I ever had to wait for prior to now was Dance of Dragons, and I had to wait for it for like 6 months or something.
Oh my.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
my
I
sweet
know.
summer child.
But
So, how's the weight treating you now?
listen, I am closer to 40 than I am to 30, and when I started reading these books, I was still in my 20s. So that's all I'm gonna say.
So for me, I actually, like, I bought the first book, like, when I was, like, really little, like, concerningly little. I was one of those, like, little kids who would go into Barnes & Nobles and just browse through the fantasy section because I'd read all of, like, the kids' fantasy, and I was like, give more books. And my parents were just like, she's reading, so, like, all of this content is probably fine. It wasn't. So this was about the time so I was about, like, I would say, like, 10 or 12, and I got super into the Dragonlance books, and I was sort of, like, digging through the shelves of the fantasy section looking for something else, and it was like, ooh, Game of Thrones, and I was like, all right, I'll buy this. And then I bought it, and then it sat on my shelf collecting dust until, like, I want to say, like, maybe a year or two after the show started, because I did not start watching the show immediately, and I was like, and everybody was like, watch Game of Thrones, you're gonna like it, and I'm like, meh. And then I watched the first episode of Game of Thrones, and I'm like, you want to read the books first? So then I read all the books, and then I watched the rest of the show, and I was like, why did I watch the show? Actually, no, this was season 1 days, it was still correct.
Yeah, no, season 1 was like, oh my God. Like, and I remember the first episode of Game of Thrones, the TV show, aired during JordanCon weekend. And if you are not familiar with JordanCon is a Wheel of Time convention that is also here in Atlanta, and I happen to be the chair of that as well. And I'm not plugging it because at this moment I'm representing DragonCon, not JordanCon. I'm just telling a story. And so we wanted to throw a watch party for Game of Thrones at JordanCon, obviously. And so we, like, put it on our website or something like that. And then, like, I got a voicemail from a very nice lawyer at HBO. And he said, hey, call me. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what this could be. And so I called him, and he's like, okay, so, like, what are your intentions towards throwing a watch party? I'm like, well, and he's like, okay. And, like, just laid out for me, like, you can't throw a watch party. Like, well, that is not allowed under, like, whatever, like, I can't remember how the copyright on this or the streaming rights work or whatever, but you are actually not allowed to throw a watch party for something and charge money for it, which if it was a convention event, it would have been me charging money to go see it. And so if it was just us in a hotel room who happened to all be watching Game of Thrones that night, that's allowed. And so that's what we ended up doing, is like, oh, we're not having an official event. We're just some friends watching Game of Thrones after a convention ends. This was our dead dog party. And like, that was really fun watching it with a whole bunch of people who were really excited about seeing a good fantasy story being adapted for the screen like that. You're not really a fan until you get a cease and desist.
Oh, I've been there, but that was for a different convention.
Yeah. All right. So what made you stick with these books? Like, you two are really excited about the Game of Thrones series, and you guys have really dived into the fandom. Talk to me about, like, how you got connected with this, and then, like, what makes you stick with this?
To be honest, I hadn't read a lot of fantasy at that point in my life. I was actually way more of I'd just been more in, like, the sci-fi realm for a long time. And like, I read the fantasy stuff when I was younger, like when I was a kid, and then I kind of took a very long break from it, minus, like, rereading, Tolkien. So I to be honest, like, I don't know that I can say what anything specific that made me stick with the series. Like, with the first book, to be honest, it was a little bit of a slow starter for me. Like, I remember getting maybe halfway through it or something like that and being like, I mean, I'm going to finish this because I'm, like, a completionist, but am I going to actually read the rest of these books? I don't know. It was just very lengthy, and there's a lot of build up in the first book. But then Ned died. Spoiler alert. It's been 25 years, and if you're in this panel, I'm just assuming.
If you didn't know that Ned dies, you might be in the wrong room.
But then Ned died, and I was like, what? No way. He didn't actually just die. Come on. And I kept reading because like it was like an off-page sort of thing, and I was like, he didn't actually die. They wouldn't just kill their main character, but of
Like,
course,
this is just some kind of fake out, right?
right, exactly. But of course, he was dead, and I was like, oh well, okay. Because I've always been like, I am not a happy ending person. I have always been the type of person that's like, yeah, give me something different. So the fact that Ned was one of the POV characters, the main character really for so much of the book, and then he was just dead, I was like, all right. I'm done. I'm good. I want to read all of these. And then, this many years later, I've read them all over and over and over again. I've lost track. It's over a dozen times.
I think I was on like my 7th reread, at which point I was like, maybe we'll hold this off until I get a published date. So I guess 8th reread is never happening. But so for me, it was also Ned Stark related, but there was a little more trauma involved because my father's name is Ned, and I was 16 when I was reading these books, so I really self-identified with Arya, and I was like, oh no, my dad is dying. And so I also, at this point, immediately threw the books at my dad, and I'm like, hey, there's this cool book series that stars a man named after you, and so like he comes back to me like partway through the book, and he's like, are you kidding me? Like, I just died, and I'm like, you're welcome. And so, after that, it became like just like a father-daughter thing. So like we both read the books together, and then I was like, yay, more things to bond with Dad about, because like we had Star Wars together, and now we have Game of Thrones, and it was fun. And then we tried to bully my mom into watching, and she did not like the violence. So that didn't work. But yeah, I stuck with the book series because like I was always a fantasy person, and I was always a fantasy reader, and like my bookshelf, which I unfortunately just had to purge recently, was just a lot of fantasy and then like one sci-fi book maybe. And so it was sort of like a natural progression to me to also read this. And it was sort of, at the time I was reading the Silmarillion for the first time, so this was my break book.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it was a good break book.
I'm sorry, I love Tolkien, but like literally anything is a break book from the Silmarillion.
Yeah, don't do it. It's not worth it, but it's also super worth it.
All right, so you mentioned Ned Stark. A lot of people describe it as the moment they closed the book and threw it at the wall. Like, has anybody else had that feeling? Like I can't. Yeah, I see a hand up there. Like, there's a moment where you're reading through the series, either the first one, third, like one of the books. You're just like, oh my god, I can't believe this just happened. So, what was your throw the book at the wall moment?
It was Oberyn. So
okay.
I was super invested in Dorne as a place, and I still am. I was gonna wear my Ilaria cosplay today, but then I woke up at 11, and I'm like, maybe we'll just wear clothes, like, at all. Mm-hmm. So, I was, like, really invested in the Dorne storyline and, like, the moralities of Dorne in the book and, like, their, extreme, like, and, like, specifically Ilaria's, like, whole stance on, like, I don't want you to fight this war because you're going to die, and then your older daughters will fight this war, and then they're going to die, and then my younger daughters will want to avenge them, and then they're going to die, and like that whole thing she had, and like that whole the dynamic of Dorne and being like, we don't hurt kids, like we will not, and of course the show just discarded that. It's fine, I guess. But so yeah, when Oberyn died, I straight up like shrieked, and actually I just sort of shook the book and I put it down and I like stomped away, and then I went back because of course I had to keep reading, but I was mad.
Mm-hmm. For me, I didn't have like one big thing that happened in the books that would have made me throw it at the wall, or did make me throw it at the wall. It was more me being mad at myself for getting spoiled for the Red Wedding, because like about 60 pages before I read the Red Wedding chapters, I was looking up. I wanted to know. Don't ask me what it was. I don't know. All I know is that I wanted to know something about Catelyn Stark. So I Googled, and I opened up the wiki page, and it was like whatever I wanted to know was like also listed like in the description right before, and then it goes into the red wedding thing, and I'm like, wait, what? Daisy Mormont's dead, like all these Mormons are dead, all of everybody is dead, Catelyn Stark, and I was like, what the I stopped myself that time.
It's not even noon yet, you're good.
So that was more I guess less a throw the book at the wall moment. Although to be honest, like I really it's not so much a throw the book at the wall because it's not like one big thing that happens, but like all of Tyrion's travelogues in Dance with Dragons just had me like slamming my head against a wall. Also, Tyrion, like when I first started reading the books, I really liked Tyrion, and then the farther I get in, I was like, I don't actually like this guy. He's kind of a jerk. And then as on like subsequent rereads, I like disliked him more and more. But no matter what, the first time I read Dance with Dragons, I was just immediately exhausted with his travelogue story.
Oh my God, like I understand what Martin was doing. Like he was doing like kind of a riff on a medieval travelogue, and like I get it, I understand it. I'm sure there's a whole lot of like deep symbolism and like whatever, but oh my God, like watching him like sail down a river and complain about everything.
Yep, the like, complaining, man.
Yeah,
the
and
complaining.
yes, Tyrion has a lot to complain about. Like if he was not in a dark place at that moment, like that would have been weird. But it is a difficult thing to read and to be immersed in the head of someone who is in that kind of psychological place. And it's a very frustrating set of chapters to get through. So for me, my throw the book at the wall moment, Ned Stark was definitely like that was a big moment. The red wedding, the places where I've gotten frustrated with the story, not like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened, but like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Like, what are you doing? It was Brienne's like fake out execution, and like that. I was like, that's when I was like, you are just doing this for the sake of messing with your audience. This is not you deconstructing a trope. This is you just trying to like, get a thing from us. And then Jen Poole's wedding night. And I'm not going to go into description because it's before noon. But Jen Poole's wedding night was one of those like, okay, again, you're just doing this for the shock value. This is not something that's actually important to the character, but this is, wow, dude, like, come on. So, yeah. So those are my frustrated moments with the series. Do you have moments where you got frustrated with the series?
Oh, I mean, again, Tyrion.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I there, the part of what drew me to Game of Thrones was I'm going to quote unquote, the realism of it, that Martin didn't, he didn't pull any punches. Like he was just like, this is a bad world to live in. It's worse for the peasants, but it's bad for the rich people too. And, like I liked that about it. Like I said earlier, when Ned Stark died, and that was, I guess, what really got me hooked, because I don't want a happy ending. I want I want that realistic story. Realistic. I'm keeping using quotes on purpose. But there's a point in these books, and honestly in the show, that was like one of the things that just got so frustrating, because like sometimes you don't need to show things or even tell them. So I'm not gonna, it's like I'm trying to, how do I say, I don't want to say the word, but like there's just so much like assault in these books.
Yes.
And it gets like,
it's exhausting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I actually just reread Game of Thrones. I actually hadn't done a reread in like 4 years after reading them, I think like once a year, sometimes twice a year prior to that. So I hadn't reread them in like 4.5 years. And I just reread Game of Thrones right before Dragon Con. Honestly, I was like, I need to remember why I enjoyed this series. I need to remember, not just, not the show, but like I really need to remember why I enjoyed these books in the first place. And I was rereading the book, and it's like Game of Thrones is dark, but as I'm reading it, I'm thinking I'm really enjoying myself But I also know that this is like the least dark of the books, even with everything awful that happens in it. So yeah, it's definitely like it does get exhausting, especially by book 5. But again, like then I'm just getting into Tyrion is exhausting, and that's like the biggest reason why I got exhausted with it.
How about you, Nami?
Yeah, I think, for me it was, once again, the assault. And I think when I was initially reading it, I was just like so like hype that I like sped through it all, and I kind of blazed past a lot of it, and then like rereads get a little more difficult because I notice it more. And I think what really struck me is like Dany's wedding night in the first book, and I just was like, and like Tara said, like it's so mild compared to like what we see later, especially the Jane Pool, which I have to skip those pages. Like I can't do it. But like it was just, for me, it was like noticing it more and more every time I reread it, because I also like, in the middle of all of this, like Outlander came out and I tried to watch it and I was like, I cannot do this because it is very assaulty. And so I was like, it was like I was paying more attention to it, and I was like, oh no, this is really, really exhausting now. Can somebody make like a big cut of the books where you just cut out all those bits and I can reread that? That would be great. That sounds lovely. Ooh, I can just put Post-its over it in my book.
That's right, you could. Okay, so let's change to something a little bit more lighthearted.
Yes, please.
Yes. So favorite moments. Like, what are some of your favorite moments and favorite character scenes?
Oh man, where do we even start?
I know there's so many.
Okay. So I'm just gonna go back to like book 1, like that moment when I knew that Arya was my girl, which was like she like bullies Joffrey and throws his sword away, and I'm like, yes, girl, do it more. He sucks.
Oh my gosh, I have like so many. There's a lot of little Sansa moments in book 1 that I think I glossed over the first time. Sansa actually didn't become one of my favorite characters until I read the books a second time, which was honestly like immediately after I'd finished them the first time. So, but there's a lot of these little Sansa moments in book 1 that I really just love, where I think a lot of people just are, especially if it's the first time you're reading it, you're rushing through and you don't see like the little kindnesses that she, the way she speaks to her friends, the way she acts to people around her that she doesn't need to be nice to. Also, though, at the very end of book 1, when Dany comes out of the fire with those dragons, man,
that
is
awesome.
It's like, seeing it on the show was amazing, but just reading it the first time, I was like, I don't even care about dragons. Like, dragon books have never been a thing with me. Like I said earlier, I was much more into sci-fi for like a very long period of my life, but like, man, reading that when she comes out of the fire and those dragon eggs have hatched, it was just like, whoa, this is awesome. And I'm like in my 20s, like just like, like a little girl, like I'm reading a horse book for the first time.
Yeah, Sansa is one of those characters that improves with the reader's maturity. Like 20-year-old me really like was definitely Team Arya. And then 40-year-old me is more Team Sansa. And I think it's just because I understand Sansa better than I did when I was younger. Sansa's like, so Arya's really awesome because she gets to do like the like woo girl, like the action girl kind of tropes, and that is sort of like first wave feminism kind of things, and so like that's definitely like what my brain at the time was trained to look for in terms of like a strong female character. She's got a sword, she's gonna stab somebody with it. This is awesome. This is feminism, and then not really understanding that Sansa's coping mechanisms and the way that she deals with the world is also extremely valid and extremely feminist as well, and that I don't need to be so judgy about other women and how they choose to do things. So like definitely like as I matured and developed as a feminist, that was I understood and appreciated Sansa so much more.
Yeah, I really think that was the lesson that Sansa taught all of us, because I can think of every female Game of Thrones fan that I know who read the books and knee-jerk was like, Arya's the best, and, I did it too. And then, I want to say, around 20, I was like, okay, wait a second, no, I see why Sansa is good. And it's like, ooh, that was loud. kind of scared myself a little bit there. We're good. But her quiet strength and her ability to survive is just so amazing because, when it comes to real life, you can't just punch your problems, and sometimes all you can do is endure. And the ability to endure is so often undervalued, and the ability to survive is not noticed as a important trait. It's like either you get out of either you're not in a bad situation or you need to get out of your bad situation, and that's like first wave feminism. There was an ignorance of the power it takes to just exist and survive even when things are bad.
Well, and also to be kind while you're doing
exactly.
it. Exactly.
And it's like Sansa's ability to kind of make it through all of that was so poignant. And I remember to me the parts that I really loved was her in her disguised time at the Eyrie when she's tending to Robin and taking care of him and dealing with Peter and and how despite all of this and her aunt's betrayal she's still being very kind, and it was just it was so good. I love Sansa now. I've ceased being on teams with the Stark sisters. I just want Stark sisters in friendship again. I'm waiting for the sisterly reunion arc because I just had one with my real life sisters, so I'm like, all right, my fantasy sisters got to do it now.
I do want to also bring up, because I know we're talking a lot about the first book because of course it's the 25th anniversary of the first book, but another really great moment that happened in I believe it was book 4 was when Doran Martell, and I know you I had to bring this up because Nami also loves the Martells, when Doran Martell is talking to Arianne and he's saying she's so mad at him because he doesn't do anything and he doesn't do anything, and he's like, yeah, no, I've been doing things, and we are going to avenge everything that happened to our family with fire and blood. That moment was just ooh, because Doran has been kind of boring up until now. Oberyn was the fiery one. It's again the two sides of the same coin with the brothers instead of sisters this time, but it was ooh, just that shiver up your back, wow, he is a badass.
I loved the moment where Arianne is really freaking out at him at them, because she's you are discarding me as your heir and you are caring more about your son than you are about me, and you're trying to get his power up, so I'm gonna do my own thing. And then you find out that Doran's been obviously playing multiple games at the same time, so he's got a plan for his son, he's got a plan for Arianne, he's got a plan for everything. And the moment when she's sitting there and she's oh, you were doing the work. Oh, heck.
Oopsie.
Sorry, Dad. My bad.
Moral of the story, respect your elders.
That's right. There's no other moral in Game of Thrones.
You're not wrong,
none. Absolutely none.
All right, so do you have any characters that you wish you got to see more of in the books?
All of Dorne, just more Dorne.
Okay.
Cover me in Dorne, please. Thanks. I'm funny 5% of the time. But so, I just really want more Arianne, and I also want more Myrcella and interactions with her and Dorne, and sort of like their push to make her like their backing for Queen, and that like, I want more of that story. I want more of that storyline because the shows just sort of took that and lit it up, and I resented that a bit.
Yeah, no, I've definitely joked around with people like, oh, now I know which plot lines I'm supposed to pay attention to in Game of Thrones, because if it didn't make it into the TV show, it's probably not that important. And that made a lot of like Dorne and Arianne fans really mad at me.
Made me so mad.
Yeah,
so I was
sorry.
I mean, the Dorne stuff, the thing is, like, it made it into the show, some of Dorne, and what they did with it was just like, it was so bad. It was just it was so bad. So I don't know if I would say there's necessarily a single character I wish I had more of it. It's hard because it's like there's more coming for a lot of the characters. I will say that I wish. I don't even know. Like, it's like part of me wants to say I wish we'd gotten Brienne POV chapters earlier, because in my most full recent reread, which was like mid 2017, I was reading Feast for Crows. And I realized that, wow, Feast for Crows is actually, don't hate me, my favorite of the 5 books now, somehow. And the Brienne chapters, Brienne is probably up there with, like, maybe Jamie as my favorite POV. So, which when the first, like, maybe 10 times I read these books, I did not feel that way. But like you said, especially if you're rereading them a lot, as you, like, mature or just grow as a person, your opinion of what you enjoy about these books is going to evolve as well. And so, yeah, for me, it was probably like, wow, I wish we had more Brienne.
Yeah, no, Brienne is definitely a character that, like, that's definitely, like, my woo girl, like, character, like, more than Arya. She's my woo girl. Yeah, like, I want to see her do awesome things, and I want her to be beloved for who she is. And I really appreciated in the TV show that they had Tormund, like, have a little crush on her and, like, really just appreciate her for who she is and, like, just adore what she is and who she is. And also just be kind of cool with it when she wasn't into him. She should have been, I think, much better than how Jamie treated her. I mean, yeah, so yes, like, her and Jamie were, like, in the show were, like, a perfect couple. But then the show decided that, no, we gotta, like, hit a reset button on that, and Jamie's gotta go back to Cersei for some reason.
There's no such thing as character growth in Game of Thrones, the show.
Yeah. But I appreciate that the show at least treated Brienne extremely well, because that could have been a very difficult character for them to handle, especially since a lot of their backstory when it comes to, like, how they handle the women and, like, the things like that wasn't fantastic. But Brienne was a character I think they treated very well in the show.
I think my only issue with her in the show was that in the books, she has never killed a person until she gets in the fight with where they're going with, like, Nimble Dick, like, off the, oh gosh, near it's like on the coast when she's looking for Sansa, and so it's book 4 before she kills a person. And like in the show, she's just immediately, like, just laying people low with her sword. And I'm not, like, hating on it per se. But it just felt like they could have been a little more, they could have eased us into that a little more, I think. Because, like, she was raised fighting with the sword, right? Like, she was raised and her dad allowed her to train, but she'd never actually, like, killed anybody because she was still a girl. Like, she's still a woman. So, yeah, they just kind of threw that at us.
Yeah, I think also, like, you know, in terms of fantasy series, like, having a character in an environment where, like, people just murder willy-nilly, who is like, well, maybe no murder is, like, it's kind of a big deal. So, like, the fact that they were just like, and she's ready to murder, let's go. And I know that's Arya's story arc, but, like, that's not Brienne's. Brienne's is, like, very different, and I think it would have been nice to have that separation.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see, where was I? How about from the audience? Does anybody want to hop up to one of the microphones and tell us about a favorite scene or a character?
Yes, please use the mics. Please.
The mics.
With the masks, no one will hear you.
You gotta get really into the microphone.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, I came to Game of Thrones later, the books, The Song of Ice and Fire, because I watched the show first. Only because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings Tolkien fan, and I was like, oh, look at Ned Stark. So, I was coming to Dragon Con, and I was like, oh, I can't go to these Song of Ice and Fire things because they're talking about stuff I have no idea what they're talking about. So I decided to finish watching the show and then start the books because I had no other reference point. Now that I've gotten through the books, Arya is still one of my favorite characters. I'm also a big fan of Hayao Miyazaki and those movies, and I love the way he does his heroines, that the children are always doing so much, and the maturity of people at a young age, and to see everything that she's gone through and what her character does at, like, 10 years old. and 11 years old and 12 years old is one of my favorite things.
Arya definitely gets some of the crowning moments of awesome, especially in the early books.
She has a very, very, I haven't really talked much about Arya. I like Arya. Like, how can you not like Arya, honestly? But she has a very, very dark character arc. And I think it's like, of course, at this point in the books, they all still basically have a very dark character arc. But Arya's is, like, the darkest. Like, girl is just learning how to murder people across the narrow sea.
Yeah, she's the one who shows up to the family reunion with a suitcase full of other people's faces.
Preferably Frey faces, honestly. I mean, I will. That is one thing whenever in the show they had her just be the one who, and as much as I hated that they didn't include Lady Stoneheart when they had Arya just be the one who murdered literally all of the Freys by like baking them pies or whatever. I was like, this is the best.
Pie maker Arya Stark, our hero.
Frey pie still exists even in the show.
It's the only time you're ever going to get Arya in the kitchen to bake something for you. Right, yes, sir.
Okay, yes. You talked about Sansa's development. Looking at it sort of as a feminine perspective, I just want to say it's a person's perspective overall. One of my favorite TV shows, which was based on the book, is I, Claudius, which is about the Emperor Claudius, who lived right after Julius Caesar and the like. And he, like Sansa, is placed in a world that is awful, people backstabbing all the way. And he, through his cunning and pulling himself back, is able to survive, eventually even becoming Emperor of Rome. And Sansa I love Sansa because she reminds me of him. And so, yeah, I just thought she was cool. Not just, I could understand why you, as women, would like him, but I think she's just a great character overall.
Mm-hmm. No, she is a great character. And when I bring feminism into something, I'm not saying that the only reading of a character is a feminist reading, because a feminist reading of a character is like, hey, let's treat her like a real person, not as like a sex reward for the hero. So, yeah, I have some opinions about that.
And also, like, as much as I talked earlier about Sansa's kindness, like, I just want to reiterate, like, in the first book, or no, I'm sorry, it's in Clash of Kings, actually, I believe, where Cersei is, talking about this, like, everybody, like, fearing her, and Sansa says, when I'm queen, I will, like, make them love me. Like, she just wants to be loved and accepted, and like she literally her entire life she has been trained to be the head of a household at the very least, and then eventually she's told she's going to marry Joffrey and she's going to be queen, but like her she never goes into that, even when things are bad for her, she never goes into that dark place of like wanting to make people fear her. She wants people to like love and respect her. Like she just wants that sort of validation, and it's just she's such a kind person. Like I think the worst thing she does is in like book 4 or 5 when she's like, I think she like is kind of a little bit rude to Sweet Robin, but like honestly, aren't we all wanting to be rude to Sweet Robin?
Some of us just get a little fed up. Right, yes.
So I was at the panel yesterday. It's all blending together.
Mm-hmm. I feel you.
And the hated, like the nailed it.
Oh, nailed it or filled it, Jon Snow, yeah.
And I was thinking that, because we're like, oh, he hasn't written the books yet, and we're really mad about like how the arcs go for a lot of the different things, especially like the Jaime going back and the way that Jon kills Daenerys and how like obsessed he is and like doesn't like the honor doesn't matter anymore for some reason. But I was just wondering, because we know that Gur spoke to the directors and the writers and said this is what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So they knew all those little things. And I wonder if he waited so long to finish this book because this is actually what he had planned. And he wanted to know what everybody's response was going to be to it. And because everyone hates it, he's now having to figure it all out. Be like, okay, everyone hates these things. How can I creatively make this better?
So I do have a lot of feelings about that, because I think part of the reason everybody hated how things ended in the show is because it became a tell, don't show. Mm-hmm. It became oh, okay, somebody has given me these bullet points of things that need to happen, so we're just going to make them happen with no connective tissue and no character development in between to justify these things. And I think that was why everybody hated it. Because the thing for me that really struck was like, Danny turning evil, I always thought that was going to happen. But I was like, make it happen gradually. Don't be like...
Not in 30 minutes.
Yes, exactly. Like, you can't be like, she heard bells and she went insane.
I mean,
who hasn't?
Yeah. I mean,
okay, fair.
Also, like, the Bran thing, I think, was the most, like, what the for moment for me, because it's like, again, I don't disagree that the show Martin gave them the broad strokes. He told them the general, like, this is how it's going to end, and like this way for these characters. So I don't disagree that Bran will very possibly end up, king or whatever in the books. But literally all he did was like sit in a chair and stare creepily. And that was after he wasn't even in an entire season of the show. What was it, season 5, I think? He wasn't even
he just
there.
sat out, yeah.
Like, he doesn't even go here, okay? So for Tyrion to be like, who has the best story? And we're all just like, come on, no. Like, even you have a better story, Tyrion, and I don't even like you.
All right, Matthew.
So I was, you asked about favorite moments, and I was thinking about two of my favorite moments. One is the moment, like I mentioned earlier, where Elia talks about sort of the futility of war and how this leads to this cycle of violence. One of the other favorite moments that popped to mind is Big Bucket Wall talking about how he wants to bathe in Bolton blood in the next book later. And you guys already touched on Arya and Sansa and kind of how these are both very compelling characters. And I think one of the great things about the series is that George kind of will present a side and then present the opposite side, both within the text. And I think that's one of the really great things about the series. So I just think that it's interesting that when you ask for favorite moments, two things that's front of my mind were sort of fundamentally opposite opinion pieces being presented. And so I didn't know if you guys had any more examples of things where George kind of presents both sides of an argument or a belief system.
Yeah, I think, oh man, that's so good. The contrast between the, yes, we should end the cycle of war, and what if I bathed in my enemy's blood? It's just, it's very, very good. I think, to me, I think I like the contrast between a lot of, like, Sansa and Cersei's, like, POVs and everything that they do. So, like, just, like, Cersei's, like, jaded ruthlessness and Sansa's, like, determination to stay kind. And it was just, the contrast of all of that was really good, because it gives me, like, Sansa gives me major Cinderella vibes, because, like, have courage and be kind. And then Cersei's just there, like, excuse me, no. The world hates me, so I hate it. And, yeah, I agree with both.
Well, yeah, I mean, Cersei, just her, she is literally, like going, like her mind is just devolving throughout the series. Like, she is becoming so obsessed with, the idea of losing her children and with with the prophecy. Like, once you, like, honestly, it's like, you don't like Cersei probably from the beginning. Like, as a character you can like her, but as a person, like, she's obviously pretty terrible. But wow, once you get in her head, it's like this odd tug of war between, like, I don't like her and I also, like, pity her so much, because she has clearly just been, she's been abused.
She's
like,
got
most
a lot
of her life.
complaints.
Yeah, she's been abused most of her life. Like, first by her father, by constantly, like, just not being a boy and being told, like, she's basically worthless, and the only thing she is worthy of is, like, marrying and like popping out some babies, and then being literally, like, physically abused by Robert, and then the minute she gets out from under that, she's just, she sees enemies coming from every side, and it's just that just de-evolution of a character that is it's fascinating and, like, sad to watch.
She makes me so sad, because in a way, I kind of assumed that she started off very Sansa-like, and she could have stayed as kind as Sansa did, but she wasn't able to. And,
Maybe if her mom had lived, and
Yeah.
maybe if her dad hadn't been
Her dad.
Yeah, different parental figures needed for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So I read the books after I was done with the series, and like my favorite character in both the books and the series was Littlefinger. So and I kind of hated how his character arc ended in season 7. So what do you guys think about his ending in the books, and do you think Sansa would like remain more loyal to him in the books since he didn't really like broker the marriage between?
Oh, she better not.
So Peter Baelish is one of those characters I love to hate.
Again,
I think he's like a really well-written character. I think he's a very realistic character. And he's definitely like, we've all known that guy, right? But man, I don't like you very much. But yeah, like he's definitely like a really good character. I just don't like him as a person.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely meeting his end, and if Sansa doesn't have a part in that in the books, I will be shocked. Like, I imagine that there's just no way she's not going to at least play some small part in his demise, and I think it's probably going to be pretty similar to what, I mean, and when you say, like, will Sansa remain loyal to him, I mean, here's the thing, like, he's not... There's not really any reason for her to be loyal to this man. Like, he only helps her because it's helping himself, right? And also his like weird obsession with her because she looks like her mom is just creepy. And like in the show, it's like a little tiny bit more palatable because, you know, Sansa is aged up quite a bit, and Sophie Turner herself is an adult. I can't remember when she turned 18, but it was like, you know, in the midst of the show filming. But in the books, like, she is like a 14-year-old girl. Yes. I think is how old she is. Like in book 5, she's 14.
Close.
And this is a man who is as old as her mother. He is in his 30s. Like, I believe they're all supposed to be in their early 30s, and he is like kissing her as if she is an adult. And you can don't give me that, but it's medieval, and I don't want to hear it. He is her parents' age. Ew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he watched her grow up. Well, and also just Baelish gives off like this really strong incel vibe, and that's like a major.
He also sent her best friend to be like abused and assaulted and like taught to please men, and her best friend was 12 at the time. This is not a good person. Like, Littlefinger, great character, fun to read. You know, I get why people like him, but like, please remember that this guy does not deserve anybody's loyalty, because ew.
All right. Let's see. I'll take a couple more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Sansa's also a character I've come around on subsequent rereads. At the end of Dance, it's the one I have the most trouble predicting what's next for her in terms of what's going to happen. I'm curious what you think is going to be next for Sansa's growth in the short term.
See, I'm so interested about this because like her story in the show pivoted so drastically from what we had in the books. So I don't even know where she's going to go from here. I am curious to see if she will somehow end up back in Winterfell anyway. Like maybe she'll hear about what's happening to Jane and she'll like go visit, or like Peter will be like, we need to talk to the Boltons and be like, we're extra BFFs and you're coming with me or something like that. I can't imagine a story in which she doesn't go back to Winterfell very soon, but also I can't picture how she's getting back there yet. And I just, God, I had a really cursed thought.
Oh no.
No, don't do it.
No, I'm not going to say it. I'm going to keep it to myself because it's cursed and nobody needs to deal with this. Bye.
It's only 12:19, and just keep it to yourself for a few more hours.
It's mine.
I mean, yeah, I obviously, like, she, first of all, she has the training as like a lady and everything, but also what we're shown in book 5 is that, you know, she's also learning how to keep books, like keep the books for the home and everything. So and there's also that there's a conversation she has with Littlefinger, I believe, that he, you know, where he's talking about Harry Harding, right?
Yeah.
Harry Harding.
Harry the
and
Heir.
Yeah, Harry the Heir, and how he essentially like wants to try to hook her up with him. And she's like, but I'm like supposed to be like a bastard. Like, how is that gonna work? So I mean, I think that in the short term, where it's just gonna mostly be like Peter trying to use her to continue to gain his power in the Vale. I do think that she's going to end up back at Winterfell sooner rather than later. I can't possibly predict how at this point, because like Nami said, like the story in the show is just so crazy different. But I would be shocked if she wasn't back at Winterfell, or at least heading back up there by the end of book 6, when we get it 85 years from now.
That is one of the questions on my list over here, is when do you think the next book will come out?
Do we even want to talk about that?
Yeah.
I think since
a cursed
we've all
question.
waited. Sorry, did I almost say wasted? Don't let me
Wasted 10 years.
Since we've all waited patiently for 10 years, I feel like it's only right that we may have to wait another 10. That's my worst case scenario. If it really does take another 10 years to come out, I will cry, and then I will find George Martin, and I will cry in front of him.
Yeah. No, I came to terms with it a long time ago that I was going to learn the ending of the series from the TV show and not from the books.
Yeah.
Just because of the pace that he wrote compared to the pace of the TV show production. Because the TV show was not going to stop production for a couple years just to let him like finish another book. That's not how this works. Like, there's a lot of money on the line. They are not going to stop doing what they're doing. All right. Yes.
You're probably guessing I started with the books because this is the heralding badge from
Beautiful.
the books. So
Amazing.
Long before the television series. One of Martin's kind of master tricks is he takes fantasy tropes, turns them all around, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I am in the middle of a fantasy trope that I didn't recognize see coming. One of those is the quest. Everybody's got to have a quest, which turns out to be Bran and his merry band of misfits and the Reeds, and what a cool spin on that is, and it's not going to work out like the show. But the second is the redemptive character, which is Jaime. One of my favorite scenes is when he comes back for Brienne. He actually rides away and starts going, oh my God, suddenly this good streak is sneaking into my character. But normally, how you handle a redemptive character is you kill them. They redeem themselves in some self-sacrifice, and then they're done. So you don't have to deal with a guy that's like conflicted. So any discussion of Jaime conflict, Brienne, and the trope tricks,
I love
from
it,
the books.
honestly. I love it so much because I noticed something which was a sort of sad pattern in what I saw with characters, which is you get a character who is really, really shitty, and you see him or her start to improve, but then they die before they can finish that improvement. And improvement is a constant journey. You need to be constantly correcting yourself and relearning and unthinking your implicit terrible biases, and that is such a journey that you don't see in books, because the redemption arc is always like this big self-sacrifice moment, but that's not what redemption is to people. And I think Jaime is such a great character to see that in, because you see somebody actively struggling with that BS and that like those terrible thoughts in his head that he's trying so hard to overcome, and it's so good, which is why the show is just because it takes all that like good redemption and that good character growth and the growth you see visibly on the page of somebody putting the work in. And it was just like, what about Nat?
Check it out the window.
The worst thing they did.
Yeah, I mean, and I know you said just the books, but like, let's be real, Jaime is absolutely going to die in Cersei's arms.
No.
I think he absolutely is, unfortunately. No. But I think that there's a point A to point B that, again, the show just was never going to get. And like, when we get Jaime, because of course, like you start the books like you just hate Jaime. I mean, he kills Jory for no reason, like
he pushes a child out the window.
Yeah.
And you're like, yes, what a beautiful man.
And that's chapter 1.
Right? Like, that's like early in the book. But like, I mean, then you get his POV and you see like how conflicted he is and how he actually is. He himself is trying so hard to redeem himself. Like, he jokingly names his horses, what is it, Honor and Glory? Is it Honor and Glory? Yeah, he jokingly like names his horses this. It's just he he's got this arc that he's working so hard for, but then he's also still like threatening to send babies over the walls of River Run in via trebuchet. So like, he's still not a great person, but he's a really like, he's probably one of the best, like most well-written characters in the series, and getting his POV when we do is like Martin just really nailed that on the head.
Chef's kiss moments.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that Game of Thrones gets a lot of, the Song of Ice and Fire gets a lot of credit for is the deconstruction of fantasy tropes. I think that's that's one of the reasons why it has this big crossover appeal to people who are not normally fantasy fans, is it deconstructs those tropes of high fantasy. I know a friend of mine that we were talking about these books many, many years ago when they were first coming out, and she said she knew that this was not going to be like any other series when the prophecy didn't happen. Because if you're reading a high fantasy story and there's a prophecy, that's the roadmap for the series, and everything in that prophecy is gonna happen somehow. And it didn't happen in a Game of Thrones because there's that prophecy about Daenerys's baby going to be the stallion that mounts the world, and then she miscarries. And that is not something that ever happens in a high fantasy story. Like, if a prophecy is there, it is gonna happen. And so Martin is not the first high fantasy author to do a deconstruction of these high fantasy tropes, but I think he's the one who really popularized it in pop culture. And so he gets a lot of the credit for that.
And I also think, let's be real, he does it really, really, really well. Like, Martin is a good writer. I mean, I think that's a big part of why, like, as frustrating as the wait has gotten, why so many of us have just kind of sat back and said, okay, you know what, I'll wait for it, because it's gonna be good.
It's why I'm here saying, another 10 years, like, I guess I'll do it, because, like, it would be worth it.
Yeah, no, I'll make jokes all day about how Robert Jordan Dead turns out books faster than Martin ever does. But the quality of the writing, like, Robert Jordan is like an amazing writer. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there's a lot of beautiful things about his prose, but Martin is just like a little bit better. Like, just kind of takes it up a notch, in my opinion, and I'm sure a lot of people agree with that. Like, Martin's writing is just, it's gorgeous prose. It's layer upon layer of symbolism and historical references. His characterization is super tight, and just like these characters feel like real people. And it's like, there's a reason why, even though there hasn't been a new book in 10 years, and we all know how the story ends because of the TV show, we're still like, so what do you think is going to happen next? We really like are attached to this for very good reasons.
I mean, and that's why it's so rereadable. Like, I do reread books. I reread other books, but I can tell you, probably the only book I have read even close to as many times as I've read these is Jurassic Park. So
yeah, and like, this is a different reread, I think, than most of my rereads, because the rereads that I do. The rereads that I actually reread are my comfort rereads. It's like my favoriteest books ever. It's like the book that makes me feel soft and fluffy. I read this book because I keep getting more out of it every single time. And the series keeps giving more details to me the more time I put into it. And I love that. And, not many authors can do that. And even if they have complex plots and stuff, it kind of falls apart when you reread because you're not getting more out of the content. And I think Martin is so, so good at, like, he's good at writing, guys.
Yeah. Like, I'm not so great at plotting, but the actual writing is fantastic. And like, there's just a reason why Martin is such a highly regarded author. Like, even before Game of Thrones was published, he was an award-winning author. He'd won multiple Hugos, Nebula Awards, things like that. The guy is extremely well respected within the science fiction and fantasy writers community. Even before he became a best-selling author. Like, he's extremely influential on the genre, even without the Game of Thrones series.
Thank you for listening to the Geek Saga podcast. If you like what you heard, please check out other Geek Saga entertainment endeavors, including the Sagas and Sass webcast and podcast and Ice and Fire Con.